So welcome to the second global virtual think tank town hall, from solidarity to solutions to save lives and livelihood. The title, From Solidarity to Solutions, is really based on the last town hall, where it was clear in terms of the response from the think tank community and the demonstration of solidarity that was evident from the turnout, that we and from the volume of questions we received, that it was clear that there was solidarity in terms of the turnout. What wasn't as clear is that people were looking for answers based on the volume of questions that were submitted. And so I felt that it was important that we move from solidarity to solutions to save lives and livelihoods. And that is what this meeting and the final meeting is all about. And as you will hear as we go through the presentations this morning. First, I want to thank our partner, the Center for International Governance and Innovation, CG, in Canada, and their high-tech staff for helping make this Zoom town hall possible. I also want to thank the now 90 members of the Global Think Tank Town Hall Planning Committee and the co-chairs of the 5 working groups who are providing the leadership and direction for the reports that will be produced in the next 30 days and presented at the final town hall meeting on June 30th. Please mark your calendars. It'll be at the same time. The unprecedented speed, magnitude, and disruptions and sustained uncertainty that the COVID-19 tsunami has created in just 12 weeks is staggering. The virus has changed our lives and livelihoods for the foreseeable future and forced us to rethink our personal and institutional priorities. More people are unemployed in the US than at the height of the Great Depression. The number of hospitalizations and deaths keeps growing as the virus peaks around the world. Countries whose people do not have clean running water are unable to wash or cannot wash their hands to protect themselves, and countries with hundreds of millions of people that have only the same number of respirators as one hospital in New York City. It is these facts that compel us to come together today to mobilize the best and the brightest and all the ideas and evidence we can marshal to save lives and livelihoods. I am pleased to report think tanks have answered the call, for we are being joined today by over 430 think tanks from 84 countries. We must do everything, 430 think tank scholars and executives from 84 countries. We must do everything in our power to support policy makers and healthcare professionals who are on the front lines of this crisis, and the elderly, poor, and vulnerable who are suffering through it. We also need to identify ways to strengthen think tanks and support one another so we can survive and serve at the time when think tanks matter most. Today's program will be comprised of presentations by the 5 working group co-chairs, who will launch their working group by describing what they will focus on and what they hope to accomplish. I have asked them to produce rapid, evidence-based policy briefs and presentations by June 30th for the 3rd and final think tank town hall. The goal is to provide policymakers the public and all of you some ideas and direction that you can find useful and will move to implement. The 5 rapid response working groups need your ideas and input as they develop their evidence response to some of the immediate and longer-term challenges posed by the COVID-19 crisis. The 5 groups are as follows: addressing the public health crisis. 2, preparing national and international strategies for economic recovery and revitalization. 3, identifying innovative and inclusive public and private intervention strategies to help vulnerable groups. 4, fostering international cooperation, creating rapid response and resilient systems to respond to future crises. And last but not least, group 5, being fit for an uncertain future, new operating models for think tanks, research, communications, and funding. Before I turn it over to the chairs, Anne, can you put up the slide with the statistics on it? Can everyone see it? And so as you look at this slide, we have gone through, and the agenda today and the working groups is based on the questions and suggestions that were posed at the last summit. And as I said at the outset, we asked for the second, planning for this town hall, for people to identify the top 3 challenges facing their country. And there were 243 responses from senior think tank executives and scholars. These are ranked in the rank order. And so the economic recovery, some of this is not in any way startling given the crisis until you move down the list. And I'll just explain a few of them. I'm not going to go into great detail, but the economic recovery, clearly responding to the public health crisis in terms of public health systems, the need to promote global cooperation and initiatives that realize that and help people, dealing with the unemployment and job creation, dealing with the disparity, inequities of marginalized, vulnerable populations, preserving democracy, and there were, the explicit and repeated aspect of this was people mentioned that the emergency orders that have been put in place that impact the media, impact human rights, impact democratic institutions, when will they and how long will they be in place, and when will they be rolled back? Food and water security, climate change, social cohesion, education, helping medium and mid-sized businesses, migration and digitalization, strengthening of public services. So these are all based on the percentages you see are based on the responses. I did not have, I had, had gone through all of the responses to the first summit, of which these were taken from the registration that list that we created from people who registered for the first summit. And so this was completed yesterday. So it did not, the agenda for the 5 working groups is based on, this data, and, we were pretty close to representing, mirroring the priorities of the responses, but I didn't have the benefit and the power of these statistics in generating this. And I share this in terms of the mandate and importance placed by leading think tankers around the world in what they see as the priorities. And so I leave that with you just to underscore the importance of what we are doing, and also the need to be focused and responsive to not only what our colleagues say, but what is mirrored in the media, mirrored in the public demand for action and a response to this crisis, which I think all of us are required to respond to. So without further ado, I will turn it over to the co-chairs of each group to make a 10 to 12-minute presentation. At the conclusion of the presentation, members of the Planning Committee will be invited to contribute a brief comment, question, or suggestion. And that session will be moderated by Aaron Scholl. So I turn it over to Aaron and Samir Sarin, the co-chairs for the global health crisis.
Thank you, Jim. It's Aaron Scholl here from CG. Pleasure to be with you. Samir is going to kick things off for our group. So Samir, over to you, please.
Thank you, Aaron. We, of course, over the last few days have tried to put together what we believe is a pretty comprehensive sketch of the work this particular group will undertake. And we are delighted to learn from Jim today that we have enthusiastic response from lots of institutions. And we certainly in this group look forward to hearing from many of you. We would seek your advice, your local experiences, your specialist inputs, because many of us agree that one size does not fit all, and we need to make this particular proposition not only rapid in its nature in terms of our recommendations, but also contextual so that many will benefit from it. So this is a pitch to all of you to join our group and help us build a document that is responsive. Let me go to the next slide. Over the next few slides, we're going to basically tease you with some of the ideas we are going to flesh out into independent sets of recommendations of maybe 5 to 10 pages each, so that countries which are seeking inputs on certain issues can adopt those particular reports more easily and access those particular ideas more easily. The first, of course, as Jim was mentioning, is to do what think tanks are meant to do: build knowledge and build best practice networks and solutions that are a global public good. And I think over the next few months, what we do now is also going to allow humanity and the world to respond to challenges of the future. We want to tap into existing frameworks like the GIS aid initiative for development of vaccines and solutions on an immediate basis. We want to look at the EU Horizons 2020 initiative as a coronavirus €1 billion fund that wants to support innovation and research. And we also, of course, want to see how we can mobilize and catalyze the World Bank's COVID-19 response hub, which could possibly serve as the knowledge node for all of us to tap into. But we also want to go down to the communities. I think we want to bring in people today are talking about the Ebola experience. Even as Ebola was unfolding and we were obsessed with that particular pandemic, measles, malaria, and tuberculosis killed more people. So I think that we need to document other local knowledge inputs as well, so that next time when we are faced with something similar, we have recorded history in greater detail available to a greater number of people in greater number of languages. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, of course, this is going to be the centerpiece of what we really want to chase through our recommendations over the next 1 month. Jim is a tough taskmaster. So in the next 30 days, we really want to get to the meat of this. We are going to be undertaking one of the world's most ambitious and certainly the largest vaccine development and deployment programs. And we have to get this right. Not only will we have to provide vaccines to the largest number of cohort ever in human history, we may have to do it more than once. So we have to know how do we price it, how do we distribute it, how do we develop local capabilities, and how do we make it equitable. The same is true of treatment, and we are looking at that as well. And we want to look at the Gavi initiative, the G20, and of course, human capabilities and health workforce is also going to be an extremely important element. We want to look at the global health workforce network and similar initiatives to create human capabilities to aid in the distribution and dissemination and deployment of various medical and vaccines development programs around the world. Next slide. Yeah. Now, of course, this is an important element that was added into our program by one of our colleagues, and he's going to speak to you for 2 minutes at the end of this presentation. This is how do we continue to ensure that health remains the centerpiece of our SDG initiatives. It is not enough to come together to respond to this pandemic. This is the time to also put together resilient systems. We, of course, want to increase investments in healthcare, and there are numbers that we have put on screen which I don't want to repeat, but there are countries which are spending a lot more. Some countries are spending paltry amounts, but all are suffering. It seems that irrespective of how much you invested in your health systems, we were perhaps not doing it in the best manner. Is it time to relook at how we are investing in health systems, how much we are investing in health systems? We have a WHO European Investment Bank partnership, and this seeks to do some of what we really need to do right now. Can we create many more health and financial sector partnerships to ramp up our health capabilities? And of course, even as we respond to the pandemic, how do we ensure that the non-COVID related health systems continue to function and the collateral damages we witnessed in other illnesses of the past can be avoided in the next 12 to 18 months as the world responds to this challenge. Next slide. There is an element of technology, and we will keep this rather quick, nifty, fast, focused on health only because I know there's a working group that's working on tech for development and tech for the vulnerable groups. But here we are really looking at scaling up our health response capabilities using remote and telemedicine at scale. There are some Indian models, there are African models, there are some other models that need to be far more efficient, and they need to be ramped up in terms of their presence. We also want to look at technologies which over the next 12 to 18 months will help us contain the pandemic as the second and third wave come back into play. We want to see how social media for good can be used for mental health issues, can be used for sharing information, sharing treatment information. There are anecdotes of doctors in Italy sharing treatment of pulmonary diseases with the larger community, for example. So they have used social media to spread awareness of what happens with certain symptoms and how to respond to it. We also want to start looking at ideas around digital health insurance and protection schemes. Using technology, can we give governance to folks who don't get real governance, health governance especially, but even larger social governances. Next slide. And of course, all of this is going to be futile if we don't focus on resilience and if we don't focus on building country capacities. And I think Jim is also quite enthusiastic about the idea of building a framework which allows us to assess country capabilities, invest in country capacities, and rank them and help them climb up the ladder in terms of their preparedness. Now, there is a Global Health Security Index, which was released in 2019, Economist Intelligence Unit, John Hopkins, and NTI. Guess what? They ranked US as the most prepared country to deal with an outbreak of an infectious disease. We all know how the US is doing. They were right on the second count. UK was coming second in that list, and UK probably is coming second in how unprepared they have been. But I think this is an initiative that now needs to be far more broad-based, and we need far more organizations and individuals coming into creating such assessments. It is good because it decided to put something out there. It is now time to refine it and grow it, build public-private partnerships, get the WHO, get financial sector and insurance sectors involved in assessing risks and assessing country resiliences. Next slide. Great. So I think I have used 7 minutes of my time. We have 3 inputs from my colleagues on the team. I want to bring in Pamela from our Hong Kong Foundation, Robert Yates, and General Yadlin for 2 minutes each. Pamela, you have to unmute yourself. Pamela, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Samir, let's go to General Yadlin. We'll come back
General
to
Yadlin, you want to come in? We'll come to Pamela later.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, many thanks, Jim, Aaron, and Samir. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Angela Moore, Head of Community Engagement from our Hong Kong Foundation. And next to me is my colleague, Pamela Tin, Head of Healthcare and Social Development Research under the Foundation's Public Policy Institute. Our Hong Kong Foundation is a non-profit, non-government think tank founded by the first chief
You have
executive.
2 minutes. You have 2 minutes. We'll move to the meat.
Yeah.
No introductions. We know you. 2 minutes.
And I'm delighted to share with you the key public health measures implemented in Hong Kong during the COVID-19 pandemic that contributed to flattening the curve in Hong Kong. As everyone knows, Hong Kong is one of the most densely populated cities in the world with a population of over 7 million people and is an international travel hub. This makes Hong Kong highly vulnerable to the health risk posed by COVID-19. Yet, the first COVID-19 case in Hong Kong was reported on 22nd of Jan, and up till May 13th, this morning, Hong Kong has a total of 1,047 reported cases, and so far 990 patients have already recovered, with 4 deaths. So Pam will elaborate a bit more on the measures taken in Hong Kong.
Yes, so basically Hong Kong took a rather multi-pronged approach to this whole, to battling against COVID-19. And so we implemented a suite of public health measures, key ones that include, for example, entry restrictions in a staged approach, stringent contact tracing quarantine measures such as the compulsory 14-day quarantine for people with high risk and close contacts of confirmed cases. We also had very stringent surveillance and screening measures in place. For example, our immigration department record system was linked with public hospitals for accurate travel history to facilitate case.
2 minutes remaining for all presentation. We need
Thank you, Pam. We will move to General Yadlin now. General Yadlin, please.
Yeah, I think the most important issue today is to debrief, to make the inquiry about the policy government have taken in the first wave, because we are only at the beginning, at the end of the beginning of the first wave. And if we will not learn, lesson learned from the first policy applications, we may return with the same mistake. We are not looking to finger pointing or to find who is guilty. We need to learn how to do it better next time. And the most important thing is to understand that this is not a health crisis stand-alone dimension. It has social, economic, moral, and political dimension of the crisis. Here in Israel, we basically defeated the virus on the health front, but we are only in the beginning of the economic and social crisis that we haven't seen in the last 40 years. So be prepared to handle both the health crisis and the economic crisis simultaneously. There is trade-off. We have to learn them and to implement them next time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is Robert there? Robert Yates?
Yes, he is.
Yes, greetings from Chatham House. Well, COVID-19 is a universal threat and we need a universal response. And quite simply, what we need is everyone on the planet getting a full range of health services. Public health services, all the surveillance, preventive health services. You know, it's essential that everyone on the planet gets access to a vaccine, hopefully when it's developed. Curative services, including ICU services and palliative care for those who are going to succumb to the disease. And of course, we need to be accessing those services with full financial protection. We can't have the situation that rich people get the services and poor people don't. That's in no one's interest. And what I just described there is universal health coverage. And this is why Dr. Tedros at WHO is absolutely right. The way to tackle this is through universal health coverage. Healthy, wealthy people cross-subsidize the sick and the poor. That can only be achieved through a predominantly publicly financed health system. The world is moving in that direction. We need to accelerate publicly financed UHC reforms. And this is a very political process where I think think tanks have a major role.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you. Jim, we hand it back to you. Our turn is over.
Okay, so I want to underscore that you need to cut to the chase. and no public service advertisements for your organizations because of the shortness of time. I now turn it over to Alba and Carl on the preparing for national and international strategies for economic recovery and revitalization. Carl and Alba.
Yes, Jim, how are you?
Good.
Welcome, everybody. I'm fine, thank you. I would like to, first of all, welcome my colleague, Carol Lenou, from the Center for European Policy Studies, who's the co-chair of this working group. We also welcome all the members of this working group who we have actually on this slide, okay? Who we have on this slide, and counting, hopefully we're going to have more people. Just a quick introduction of all the working groups. We believe that this one is the toughest. Why? Because it's the one dealing with the recovery of the economy, which is the driving engine of everything else. Only a takeoff of the economy out of its deep recession, the one that we are in and getting in deeper actually, will support all the other causes, whether we're talking about public health, whether we're talking about helping the vulnerable groups, responding to future crises, let alone the future of think tanks. It all rotates around the economy. Another level of difficulty lies in all the unknowns related to the recovery of the economy, because it's related to control over COVID-19 internationally and the discovery of vaccine. Okay, and I add to this what Jim has just mentioned about when they had the responses of the 243 responses, the major policy issues on top of the list was the economic recovery and the global cooperation. Actually, we are going to be dealing with both of these. Having said this, let me mention 6 main points at the economic recovery level that we are planning to focus on, and they're all being put in the form of questions, because what we hope to get out of those working groups, of this working group, is actually suggestions on how to answer those questions. First one is related to SMEs. SMEs have been hit more than others, okay? They've been hit very hard. So how do we best support them in order to be able to float and in order to recover? There are many suggestions there. One of them is to link them to the bigger companies as part of the local value chains, for instance, and others. We are seeking a lot here. Second point, who is to lead the recovery efforts? And this is a very important question to address. Should it be governments? Should it be the private sector? Or should it be both? And it should be both, but in how is the division? What percentage? The third topic is the digitalization. Digitalization is both a challenge for countries and a vehicle for the economic recovery. It's both. How do we address this issue? And actually our partner, our member in the working group is going to be commenting on that. Fourth issue is how to strike a balance between short-term and long-term objectives of the fiscal and monetary policies. It's not normal that central banks continue to give money to the people. There has to be a way out of that, and the way out is through the recovery. So how do we put the balance between the policies? How do we meet the financing challenge for health and for all other requirements? It's a very serious issue. Debt is being accumulated. How do we handle that? How to transform, and then finally, how to transform the informal sector from a burden to the economy to being an agent of recovery. And this is actually a very, very critical issue in many countries of the world. Egypt is definitely one, Middle East is another, India, all sorts of countries in the world. These are the 6 issues that are, clear economic issues, and I leave the word for my colleague, Carol Lenou, to talk about the global cooperation portion. Go ahead, Carol.
Thank you, Abla. Thank you, Jim, also for organizing this. I think it is important, and let me give a perspective, let's say, how I see this from an international point of view, apart from the European point of view. First of all, if I compare this to the financial crisis of 2009, 2010, I think, let's say, that at that moment, the G20 has been much more quickly and much more rapidly involved at that time than it is today. Of course, we have seen some action of the G20, but I think it's very limited. Of course, it is related to leadership of the functioning of the G20, but I think the main panel at global level to react on economic policy matters, for me, certainly since the financial crisis, seems to be the G20. Related to that is the question which we have, whether the multilateral institutions are really responding. Of course, again, in 2008, 2009, we saw that the G20 instructed many different international institutions to react. It instructed the IMF, the BIS, other international institutions to react. the IFS as well, to do something, and they came up with an entire plan. My question is again, this time, do we see this to the same degree? I wonder. Related to that is also what we've been seeing for the last 3-4 years already, is the reaction certainly by the United States against some of these multilateral institutions, and I think in particular the WTO. We know that the WTO is almost no longer functional because its dispute settlement panel will stop to function just because they haven't nominated any judges. If you're in a context, let's say, where we fear, let's say, that this crisis may spill over into a form of trade conflicts, and we don't have a functioning WTO, we have even more of a problem. So the big problem which we see that there may be, as a result of the current crisis, a risk of clashes above all between the two big blocs, being China and the United States, and that we are basically something in what Graham Allison described in his book, To Guide This Trap. Let's say two big blocks which don't support each other and which will start in a form of war, and maybe a form of a trade war, just to remain the hegemon of this world. What I would probably add a brief word, let's say, to Abla to add, let's say, what is Europe here? Where is Europe in this context? And Abla can see it from her perspective, from Egypt or from Africa. I was happy to see that Samir mentioned the initiatives taken by Europe in the not 1 billion fund, but the 1 trillion fund, by the way, Samir. But also he referred to the EIB as being very active. That is correct. But if I speak to Abla about this, she has a different perspective about what Europe is doing. Abla, if you say something about this. She hasn't heard it. Abla?
Okay.
I mean, the intention was that Abla would say, but basically from her perspective, she didn't see Europe as reacting so much. So I then pass the floor to Sanobe from the ADBI, briefly.
Okay, thank you. Jim, please allow me to show up. So I'm talking about digitalization. Digitalization is expected to play a central role in economic recovery. Of course, e-commerce, e-learning, and e-government are not new, but the coronavirus made them more important than ever. Shift from physical stores to e-commerce is vitally important for most businesses in most parts of the world. In addition, a long-run change in economic geography or economic landscape is going to take place. This is because the digitalization reduces the benefit of being located in a large city, while the cost of being near each other in a congested large city has increased significantly due to the outbreak of the coronavirus. So economic activities will spread further from large cities to less congested local cities in many countries. These structural changes will boost investments and economic recovery. We should encourage these positive forces and restrain negative forces such as cyber crimes and the invasion of privacy, which are expected to increase with digitalization. Other negative forces include the lack of access to internet and the lack of digital skills, and the resulting digital divide and increasing inequality. These negative forces are by and large international problems rather than domestic problems within the country, and hence they should be tackled by international community. And how to do that is a big question. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have the second slide, please? Hello?
It's there.
Yeah, it's there. That's okay.
Can I have the second slide, please?
We have it, Abba.
Alba, it's up there.
No, there is another one. Yes, yes. This is the invitation for people to join us. Our staff, okay? It's a big challenge big challenges are exactly the job and mission of think tanks. When everything else, we start to think and be out of it. So we encourage other members to join us, to join the SWAT group in coming to the rescue of the economies of the world. Jim, we have to put a smile here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Alba and Carl and Tashi, in terms of your presentations. There is a theme in terms of the technological, digital dimension to all of this that is being revealed. We'll now move on. Are there any other interventions from your group? Carl, Alba, any other intervention?
I should ask, let's say, whether there are other people, let's say, but as far as I know, not for the moment. Have we exceeded our time, Jim? Okay.
So we'll then move on to both the Center for American Progress and the Vitilio Vargas Foundation presentation on identifying innovative and inclusive public-private intervention strategies to help vulnerable groups.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Anna, can you put our presentation?
There we go.
Okay, first slide. So thank you, Jim, for all the effort you put into this initiative. And thanks also all the members of the planning committee and the participants that are going to join us in this collaborative effort. For us in FGV, it's a really pleasure to be part of this initiative. I'm talking here today, just a quick info on behalf of Marlos Lima. He is the co-host of the Group 3, but unfortunately he had a health issue in his family. He couldn't be present. So I'll try to be brief and give a quick introduction about what we are looking for in this group. And then I'll pass the floor to Winnie, our co-host, to present the key focuses and questions that we formulated as a first step for the group's activities. Well, you can go to the first slide, please. To the first one, just so that people have our names and context there. This is just a first idea, and we are open to contributions. So when we talk about identifying innovative and inclusive intervention strategies to help vulnerable groups, we really want to highlight here the importance of technology and the responsible use of technology by governments and private sector as an indispensable tool to help vulnerable groups during COVID-19. And why is that? First, because technology will be in the forefront of the next industrial and digital revolution. And identifying and understanding how technological process may affect positively and negatively specific vulnerable groups will help us understand and better plan future actions. And second, because we have already today a series of devices, accessible data, and technological means that enables us to create effective actions addressed to vulnerable groups. I'm talking about public policies, talking about private interventions, campaigns, helping not only mitigate the spread of COVID-19, but also creating opportunities or at least decreasing losses of these vulnerable groups. And we talk about effective actions. That doesn't mean investing millions in research models and machines to create data out of nowhere to mitigate the spread of the virus. Again, this is a rapid response working group. We have 45 days to work on a short policy brief. It means that we should look for best practices that are going on right now that uses the available resources and the right communication to achieve positive results in terms of the vulnerable population. For example, cell phone. It's not only a device for personal communication and information. For many people in many countries, it constitutes their only means of internet access. They don't have access to broadband or cable internet at home. They don't have any computers or iPads. It means they rely on mobile phone to access the internet. So in times of COVID, a cell phone works both as an information device, helping, for example, helping to spread the need of social distancing and campaigns to prevent the transmission of the virus. And in many families, it serves as the only device to connect a kid to a virtual classroom. So in that sense, mobile-centric policies may sound as an effective immediate intervention strategy. not only to mitigate the spread of the virus through communication, but also to offer classes for students that under the same conditions wouldn't have the school, access to school in other times. But of course, at the same time, we are aware that technology has a dual face. So cell phones may also be used to collect data for criminal purposes and to target specific groups. And we also know that most of the disinformation campaigns are generated through mobile apps. So having that in mind, we established key focuses and questions that will help the group identify important aspects regarding the positive and negative use of technology addressed to vulnerable groups, as well as some immediate actions. So Winnie, I pass the floor for you, and you can continue with the presentation.
Thank you so much, Klaus. Next slide, please. We want to really make sure that this working group taps the expertise and experience of people from around the world. Let's remember what one of our colleagues earlier said, that there's a universal threat and it requires a universal response. But we all know that there are inequities and disparities that are baked into our world and have made COVID-19 and the disease and the response to the disease different around the country. And we want to make sure that our response addresses vulnerable populations. This pandemic did not discriminate along socioeconomic and racial and ethnic lines. This disease did not know country boundaries. And so we want to make sure that the response addresses these very disparate vulnerable populations and understands what is going on in different countries and different regions, from unemployment to isolation, to homelessness, to devastation, to loss of farms, rural communities, the elderly, the poor, and the vulnerable. And we want to use technology as a means to address those inequities and help vulnerable populations, but we also know that technology is not a panacea for all of that. Next slide, please. Again, how do we have technology help those vulnerable communities respond, get back on their feet, and address the economic devastation that we have seen? How can we prevent technology from being used to hurt these vulnerable populations? What guardrails need to be in place? And again, I think we want to make sure that we have a representation from around the world, from all of the think tank participants, to ensure that the policies that we put in place do not further harm vulnerable populations. What are good examples of efforts that successfully actualize the potential use of technology to help these vulnerable groups? Are there uses of technology that actually further make marginalized communities more marginalized? We know that COVID-19 didn't create disparities, but it has brought them into stark relief, and we want to ensure that technology can be a part of returning people back to a better place. And we want to build on the work that's been done and ensure that we have a stronger response, not just to COVID-19, but to devastation that we know will occur. Next slide. And I think the last slide. Again, we just want to ensure that we have a representation from around the globe, and we ensure that the vulnerable populations and that the groups here can build on the best practices and provide the tools to address different regions and different country responses. Thank you.
Klaus, any interventions from your members of your working group at this point? Klaus, Winnie, any interventions?
We are in the process of hearing from the working group and other interventions. We have had an initial set of ideas from around the think tank community on how to ensure that the independent and very disparate ways that this pandemic has affected different vulnerable communities in different countries and in different regions, but we have no specific interventions at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And as once again, this working group encompasses a number of the top priorities that were reflected in the feedback we received from registrants to the first town hall that was reflected on the chart that I shared at the outset, underscoring the importance of this, the work of this working group. I'll now turn to Working Group 4, Fostering International Cooperation, Creating Rapid, Responsive, and Resilient Systems to Respond to Future Crises. And our colleagues from CARI, the Council for Foreign Relations and the Argentinian Council on Foreign Relations will be making the presentation. Gustavo and Pablo?
Yes, I think Gustavo having a problem with his connection.
Okay.
I will start speaking about our group. Our group is Working Group 4. We are next please, next film.
Next slide.
Yes, next slide. The participants of these groups are the Argentinian Council of International Relations, Encano Royal Institute from Spain, the Institute for Global Cooperation and Understanding from China, Belfort Center for Science and International Affairs from the United States, and Canon Institute for Global Study from Japan, and the Center for New South in Morocco. Next, please. Our goal is to be focused on the future of global local preparedness and cooperation for both health and economic system perspective and the relationship between them, including safety net. Next, please. We think our group has from these 45 next days, 3 main commitments. We have a first commitment with ourselves, with the think tanks. Think tanks need to strengthen relation and the cooperation with themselves and have new research lines to the future of crisis situations. Many governments did create crisis committee, and we haven't seen no many think tanks participating in those crisis committee. I think we should strengthen ourselves, strengthen the relation, have more evidence-based research to try to get into those crisis committee. The second commitment, please, is the second commitment is with our governments. Think tanks should participate in the making of proposal or suggesting policy management. Think tanks can provide really independent evaluations on the economic and financial impact of the policy and its own country and with its own country and share the result with think tanks network and propose economic policies. So the first commitment is with the think tanks network. The second one is with our government. And the third one is with the international community and the organizations. We've seen in the last pandemic a lack of enforcement of the WHO, and the think tanks were warning about the crisis that multilateralism was going on. We advised it in particularly during the T20s on the International Commerce Organization, but now we have seen how the World Health Organization did have a lack of enforcement. Countries didn't follow the protocols, and everyone did what it thought it was better for its own country. I think the multilateral crisis, as we see it now in the WHO, need to have think tanks insist on creating better support for international organization and for more multilateral solutions. I would like to pass now the floor to Andrés Ortega from Elcano Royal Institute.
Thank you, Pablo. Many thanks to all. Within this task force and what has already been mentioned, from my point of view, we plan to focus on 3 action-oriented topics that we value from Spain. No? The first has to do with the health dimension of the pandemic. Starting point, health is a global good. And the COVID-19 crisis has shown weakness in both the general and national systems. There is a need to put in place a global health system. The WHO is insufficient. It needs more scopes and more instruments. We need a global health coordinator, for example, as the OECD is recommending, and more rational and effective ways to ensure strategic reserves and medical supplies. That will be efficient multilateralism based on multiple actors, also private, in what can be called inductive and, sorry, I had lost the image. Inductive and multi-level governance, not just from the top, but also bottom up, no? The most vulnerable will be the ones who suffer more the economic consequences of the pandemic. Therefore, the recovery must be fair, which will require the protection of the most precarious sectors in employment and of the working and middle classes, which have already suffered in many countries the onslaught of the Great Recession. We need in the medium terms a rethinking of the social contract at an international and global level. But in the short term, in many societies, there is a need for a minimum income that could lead to something else in the future. Thirdly, there is going to be a need of public and private funding to recover the economies and the society. And for this, we need tax reforms, more taxes. We have to accelerate the plans in the OECD and in the G20 context for taxing fairly companies making business in the digital world. We need a global agreement on digital taxation. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. Now I will ask Don Wang from the Institute for Global Cooperation to take the floor.
Thank you, Gustavo and Pablo. It's my pleasure to be part of this wonderful initiative here. I'd like to add to my colleagues' observation here by emphasizing the importance of ensuring global food security when fighting COVID-19 pandemics. Reportedly, I think there are a number of countries have already introduced policies related to restrictions on the food exports. So rice importers are scrambling to stock up while exporters are putting restrictions on shipment, which might lead to the dangerous imbalance between the demand and supply in global food market. So therefore, to tackle the potential global food crisis, countries need to strengthen international cooperations and coordinations to create favorable conditions for promoting global food security. I think there are 4 things we need to do together. Number 1, the international community should jointly take urgent action to ensure smooth flow of the global food supply chain, jointly maintain food supply and price stability, and reduce the tariff barriers. And number 2, countries should support the Food and Agriculture Organization, the UN World Food Programs, and other agencies and programs in playing their unique coordinating role and actively providing humanitarian assistance to vulnerable countries. Number 3, global food trade should be unimpeded and unilateral sanctions should be removed as soon as possible. And number 4, and finally, there should be efforts to support the developing and the low-income countries, especially rural communities and farmers, to improve their economic performance, resilience, and sustainability, as well as security, food security, and nutrition. So I think all parties, we should make joint efforts to foster international cooperation and push through difficulties together. Eventually, defeat the COVID-19 pandemics and emerge stronger and more resilient. And I'm confident that together we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dong. I would like to ask Mr. Kuni Miyaki from the Canon Institute in Japan to take the floor.
Hello, greetings from Tokyo. I have only 2 minutes, so I have to, first of all, thank and support all the suggestions, ideas my colleagues have presented. I have no objection to that. The question is probably the modality. You know, it's the international cooperation sounds great, but the real problem is that, to be honest, this is a medical issue. This is a health issue, but this issue is being politicized, and it is continuing to be politicized in the foreseeable future. So the most important thing is that we have to depoliticize this issue. So in order to do that, I think the think tanks can do a lot in that field, because we can work on track 2 or track 1.5 or whatever, excluding those governments. And especially in order to depoliticize this issue, probably we shouldn't, I'm not discriminating against anybody, but we shouldn't have American and Chinese or WTO or those politicizers potential may not be the main speakers in whatever conferences we may have to convene. That means that probably we should, the like-minded think tanks or like-minded nations get together, form a group, conference of like-minded nations. Maybe Americans and Chinese and WTO can be observers, but those people, like-minded nations or like-minded people, will have to work on the modality of those efforts. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing Eric Rosenbach from the Belfort Center, so I think this will be all from Group 4, James. So thank you very much.
All right. Excellent. I now turn it over to Group 5, to Milena and Paolo, being fit for what is clearly an uncertain future, new operating models for think tanks, research, communications, and funding and management. Paolo.
Thanks, Jim. I'm Paolo, director at ISPI, the Italian Institute of International Studies. Together with Milena from EPC Serbia, we have the mission impossible to convince you, after 4 great presentations, to join our group, group number 5. How can think tank be fit for uncertain future? Also on behalf of our co-partner, Al Jazeera Center for Studies in Qatar, Stimson Center, Horn Institute Kenya, and Yangon Center Myanmar. My role is to introduce the mission of our Mission Impossible, and I will start with a quote from a Japanese writer, Muramaki, and then telling the tale of 2 cocktails bar during lockdown in Milano. And then Milena will guide you into specific action of our group. Can I have slide number 1 with the quote? Here it is, and once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through. But one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. Most of our institutions will come out of the storm, inshallah, but we'll have to be different. We will need to be different to adapt to change. Not far, here is the tale of the 2 bars. Not far from where I live in Milano, there are 2 similar cocktails bars, selling martini and Campari, very trendy and popular. 9 weeks ago came lockdown and they were closed. 3 weeks ago, one of the 2 bars reopened. How come? It is against the law, it's illegal. Only food shop can be open. I went close and realized that one of the 2 bars had reinvented himself from Campari and Martini to a vegetable and fruit shop, then adding ham and cheese in the street with people lining up in open air. One very successful, the one on the right, in only 2 weeks. The other, the one on the left, who did not change, still closed, maybe forever. How will think tank come out of the storm? How can we change and reopen the shop successfully after lockdown? What does becoming a successful vegetable shop mean for think tank? Change has been necessary. It is still clearly necessary during the storm, the short run. But some changes will stay, will be with us also in the medium-long run as a permanent transformation of our business. Some changes are simply acceleration of trends already visible, digitalization, new communication technique, need to increase interdisciplinarity in our studies. Others are brand new. We are all running large public events, and it will be at least harder, if at all possible, for a long time. Traveling around the world to research, to discuss, to meet is crucial for us, and it will be harder, if at all possible, for long. Funding is crucial for all of us. For some, it comes from government, for others, from corporate partners or foundation or wealthy individual, or as a combination of the above. Wherever the money comes from, it will be harder to get it. During and after the storm, some of our staff will be overstretched, communication, technology people, some redundant, travel management or traditional events. Even our traditional organizational model for research, resident fellow versus associate fellow, does not make any more sense if we are all non-resident for long during lockdown. As usual, also good news may come out of the storm. Going virtual looks good in some area. Virtual events are cheaper, more focused, more accessible. They may reduce the gap from large think tank and the other, promoting initiative, attracting top panelists. Will good news prevail on the challenges? Which strategy should we put in place to secure the future of our institution? Milena will explain now how we plan to work on this.
Thank you, Paolo. So what is our mission? What is the mission of the Working Group 5 and how you can get involved? As Paolo already explained, the Working Group 5 focuses on think tank survival strategies, both the short-term ones and the long-term ones, which means that we would like to focus on issues that will help us get through this storm, but also make us learn from this experience and become better at what we do and more resilient in the future, in the long run. So we have to also employ some more forward thinking. We have identified five pillars, which you can now see on the screen, or 5 areas that require rapid response and adaptation from the think tanks in order for our organizations to survive and to remain relevant. Speaking about the funding, it is clear that funding streams will be even scarcer than before, and that we will have to innovate and rethink the ways in which we partner up with others in order to be successful in fighting for the scarce resources. In terms of digitalization, going digital by default is both an opportunity and a challenge, and we will have to address both. So how do we do that? In terms of research, we all need to make very quick adaptations and shifts in terms of how we focus our research, but we are also faced with lack of resources and funding to make such refittings fast and effectively. In terms of communication, distilling meaning from this increasing chaos will remain a challenge. In terms of management and organization, our institutions will need to be managed as more agile, more adaptive, faster and more responsive. So for us as managers, this is an additional challenge. How can you be involved in contributing to these pillars? Well, first of all, and here I would like to ask for the third pillar to be for the third. Is this Paolo? Is this the third slide?
Yes, it looks like it.
It was presented already, but it's fine.
Yes, so I don't know if you can all see the link in the bottom. It is a very simple one. If you can, please copy it in. All of you who are interested in contributing, we would like you to send a message, send an email now using this link. And state also which of these 5 pillars that we have just listed you would like to contribute to. You can contribute either by an action-oriented proposal or by sharing a best practice. In the next 4 weeks, we will be in touch with you, possibly organizing one closed workshop only for the working group 5 participants on each of these 5 pillars to share ideas and collect best practices. The results which you share with us and with which you contribute will go into a very short, concise and agile report, no time for writing long books on think tanks. And the most relevant suggestions and best practices will be on how we can become the successful vegetable shop out of the storm, will be presented on the 30th of June in the 3rd town hall meeting. So this is essentially how you can contribute, and we would like to invite you to share. Thank you.
We're done, Jim.
Okay. So as I indicated and encouraged all of you to pose questions for any of the 5 working groups, and the discussion will be moderated by Aaron Scholl. So I turn it over now to Aaron.
Great, thank you very much, Jim. And it's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. I just wish it was under better circumstances. So we've received a range of questions. I've been addressing some of them in the chat function as they've been coming in, but would be unsurprising that many of the questions actually revolve around national and international strategies for economic recovery. So let's start there, and I'll just read the question out loud. The COVID-19 pandemic has increased global unemployment, pushing millions of people out of work and sending many into working poverty. How will we need to redesign job programs to retrain workers for the economy ahead? In this new era, is remote work the solution for improving the economy? And how can governments encourage remote work in the private sector? And indeed, what is the workforce of the future we are trying to construct? I'm going to pass that question over to Carl Lanou, the co-chair of Group 2. Carl, please.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for that question. I mean, personally, let's say if I hear, let's say, the working group 1 report, I think, let's say, we first have to try to tackle in a organized way the cause of this crisis, than looking at the symptoms. Of course, we know we're dealing with the symptoms, let's say, which is this massive unemployment. But as I said, let's say, an economic policy strategies at the moment, as compared to 2008, 2009, are uncoordinated. But I think, let's say, we could as well call for a multilateral approach through the economic policy institutions, as well as through a multilateral approach to the health policy institutions, which I don't see sufficiently emanating from the WHO. We all of us, let's say, have over the last weeks and months here, let's say, how much different noises are coming already out of the WHO, how to tackle this crisis, how badly they were behind the curve on informing us what was going on. That, I mean, if already there, let's say, we could act more professionally, it would be a very good thing. For example, what precautions to take, let's say, to deal with contagion? We don't know. We hear so many different things. Just, we should try to tackle what is ongoing, let's say, in a good way. And then, of course, how to deal with, for example, unemployment. The problem is what we see now, it's even in Europe, let's say, we see many strategies are basically refocusing on every country for itself. There is a very limited, even at European level, interest to tackle this at European level. How alone could you do it at international level?
Well, it's a good answer, Carl. Thanks for that. And if I could ask, if you are going to speak, just to turn your camera on so that everyone can see it.
I put it on, but I was focusing on what I had to say, let's say, rather than focusing on my video.
No, it's all good, and I'm glad that you did, because it was an area to answer, and it actually dovetails well with another question that we received from the folks that are attending today, and the question was about nationalism in the global South, but I think it extends past the global South. So I'm going to modify this question a little bit. There is ultra-nationalism growing around the world. How can and should we protect multilateralism in this atmosphere? So let's take this question over to Pablo, the chair of the Working Group on Fostering International Cooperation. Pablo, please, over to you.
Pablo, turn your mic on.
Yes. Yes, about having a new line of cooperation, we need to start working, as I say, between our own colleagues from some other think tanks to develop not only new policy, but new lines of research together. And so we can more strong actor in the international agenda. I think this is one of our goals, and we need to support that. We need to have a strong network of think tanks working together, and this kind of initiative helps very much to do so. We hope in the next 45 days we can come over with precisely and rapid and resilient and very responsive policy brief. That is our idea.
Great, thank you for that. Our next question, I'm gonna put over to Winnie from CAP. So Winnie, this one's gonna come to you. So COVID-19 has forced digital transformation and internet traffic has risen. While mature networks are built to withstand even greater loads, how has the pandemic amplified existing infrastructure inequalities, and how can we make digital society fairer and more inclusive after COVID-19? And Klaus, feel free to come in on this one as well too, because I know that FGV has done some thinking around this.
I think this is one of the biggest challenges that our global think tank community is facing. The COVID-19 has laid bare, I think, the inequities when it comes to technology. As Klaus was mentioning in our presentation, everyone has a cell phone, but people don't have the ways to use those cell phones to flatten the curve. Our colleagues from Hong Kong were talking about this earlier, where they were able to flatten the curve. I think that technology is a means to an end, as a way to address and address the disparities. But right now, the internet is not accessible to everyone. And so one of the things that our working group is very much interested in doing is ensuring that vulnerable populations who have been unbelievably hard hit from this pandemic, that those vulnerable populations can effectively utilize and access technology to address some of the vexing problems that face our countries and our regions. But the question is a good one in terms of using technology for good, ensuring that we are careful not to violate privacy, civil rights concerns, and actually exacerbate the discrepancies and disparities that exist. And maybe I'll turn it over to Klaus for his thoughts.
No, just a compliment for what you said, Winnie. Just that one of the goals of our group will also be to identify these vulnerable groups and better understand who we're talking about when we're talking about those vulnerable groups. We can talk about elderly, but we can also talk about children who don't have now play areas, who are not having access to education. We can talk about even refugees or ethnic minorities who are also suffering who might be suffering kind of persecution. So I think that one of the goals that we're looking for here also is really identifying some of those vulnerable groups and those groups that are really being affected by the crisis right now and that are really now needing a special attention from government and from the private sector. And as we said, I think that really technology might help bridge this gap, because actually we cannot fight this crisis the same way we did 100 years ago in the Spanish flu. Okay, we have new devices, we have new technology, we have new ways of dealing with data. So I really think that identifying these groups and looking for these platforms and good and the best results and good examples that are going on in terms of supporting those groups is something that we are definitely going to look for in this group.
Well, thanks for that. And I'm gonna draft directly off of that. And Samir, I want to come to you on this question. Okay. So, I mean, it's clear the vulnerable populations are ones that we're going to need to focus on, because don't forget for 1 second that we are all in this together. This is a global pandemic, and what happens in the neighbor's yard happens in your yard as well. And so we need to think about this in a more concrete way. And so, Samir, my question to you is going to be about the developing world. So it's clear that the developing world will face significant and probably the worst challenges from the outbreak of COVID-19, which comes from overlaid issues with other policy challenges, including the impact of poverty, conflict, humanitarian crisis, and other things. So the question is this: what policy options remain for these types of states, and how can they best design their responses to address the actual and potential devastation of this disease? Samir, please, over to you.
Aaron, you asked a question that would win anyone a Nobel Prize next year if they would have an answer to. What should developing countries do with the intersectionality of challenges that they will have to cope with? And the pandemic is going to exaggerate and exacerbate most of those. I think there are three important toolkits available. One is speed. I think that is extremely important. Countries with less resources will have to be more efficient and will have to respond faster using knowledge available, using knowledge networks, creating community-based response groups, and creating a decentralized, federalized, local arrangement to contain and respond to medical challenges. So the number one, decentralize, devolve, and make it a community-based approach to respond. That's number one. Number two, I think we will have to see a push from the emerging world to make sure international arrangements deliver. Those who promoted globalization at this time have given up on globalization. It is for the emerging world to ensure that international arrangements deliver at this moment. I think it is in our interest that various frameworks that are in place are made to deliver for many, many who can't. And number three, I think private partnerships. The private sector and emerging economies will have to partner deeply. I think this is not an easy relationship. They have looked at each other with suspicion. They will have to create a new trust-based relationship. We are going to be in this for the next 18 to 24 months. And we will have to see a new entente emerge between big private sector companies, domestic and international, with domestic governments and local governments, so that we can use resources wherever they are available. And private sector has resources, has certain capacities, has certain capabilities that must be tapped into. So communities, private sector, and global governance, three important areas to focus on.
Great, thank you for that, Samir. You'll have my nomination for that Nobel Prize next year, because I think you really seized on a couple of key aspects of the challenge. Paolo, I want to come to you next, well, actually, Melina and Paolo, I'd like to come to you next as well. I really, really enjoyed your presentation, and I think the way that you broke it down between these two issues, how do think tanks become the new fruit and vegetable markets rather than cafes? And I was speaking with somebody the other day, and I feel a little bit myself like I was an auto parts plant that had been retrofitted to produce ventilators. So, for example, with the health committee, I'm not an expert in global health, but we're all being pushed out of our comfort zone. So let me ask you this: what can think tanks do in the here and the now to deliver solutions that actually matter, that it will impact people's lives? Because I don't think doing another policy brief is going to cut it here. We actually need to make a difference. So Paolo and Melina, can you talk to us about how we can actually make a difference, especially given the groundswell of support that we're seeing with this initiative, please?
My first reaction is to underline what we should not simply do. What we are all doing is business as usual with Zoom and COVID in each title of what we do. This is what all think tanks in the world are doing. This is not what we are doing in the town hall today. This is a different story. But the big challenge is to increase, I mentioned that, interdisciplinarity. This is a huge challenge. I mean, I'm an Institute of International Relations. I know nothing about pandemics, COVID, and all these issues. But there is nothing we can discuss and study now and in the next few months without understanding that specific topic. So the need for partnership, the need for international cooperation, the need for, as we are doing now, to join up and to join forces and to mix up what we know with what other people know is crucial. That's my first reaction. Milena?
Thank you. Well, I would like to emphasize the role of partnerships, and this is something that those who have known me for a while, they know that I keep talking about the role of partnerships. And I think that during and after this crisis, we will need to rethink and engage in partnerships even more than before, and in much more uncomfortable ways. I can tell you the example of my think tank, the largest partnership, the largest project in which we are involved is one of the key key coordinators numbers 14 organizations working at national and local level across Serbia. We are also involved in other projects where we have 6 to 7 partners across the region. These partnerships allow us to work together with grassroots, with organizations that are working directly with the citizens, and they allow us, on the one hand, to provide our top-down approaches, methodological research to help smaller and weaker organizations methodologically and resource in the resource sense for our organizations to gain more structure, to become more persuasive in what they do. It helps us to really become the conveyors of the citizens' messages towards the policymakers. And it gives the power to what we have to say in order for that to turn into policy. It's not just about running surveys and just about getting the quantitative data from the citizens. It's about getting involved with those who can do street actions, who can get to citizens to really acquire their words, their stories, which can become then much more effective in communicating to the policymakers. So think tanks can both provide very valuable inputs to those who work at the local level with the beneficiaries, either with the vulnerable groups that Klaus was talking about, or with just ordinary citizens of any target group. And on the other hand, what we can do is be the conveyors of those messages coming from the bottom up towards the policymakers.
Thanks for that. And so what I'm really hearing from you guys is 3 things, right? Is partnerships and working together, multidisciplinarity, and working with non-traditional audiences in order to have a policy impact. And let's pause there for a moment. And because I think part of this exercise is to do a little bit of soul searching as an industry, as a think tank industry. And we've not been particularly good as an industry at any one of those things. We talk a big game about partnerships, but we're really discreet about it. We talk about multidisciplinarity, but we still have disciplinary bounds in our own institutions, and we are very good at dealing with elite audiences, but dealing with actual non-traditional audiences is something we're all going to struggle with. So this is going to push our industry, and so I think this is the beginning of something really, really meaningful in terms of an actual partnership, because I've never seen this in my career, where people are genuinely working together. We are all doing the best we can to try and bring forward ideas that can make a difference. And so thank you guys for that. And so we're almost out of time for the questions. And I'm going to turn back to Jim McGann, who's going to close it. But Jim, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot because when we have put up that slide of all the areas of concern, what struck me was the interrelationships between all of those things. You could literally draw a line between all of those and call them one big category. It makes policy making complicated because of those interrelationships. And so back to Melina's point about transdisciplinarity, can you talk to us about how you see the working groups working together? Because we're looking at discrete policy areas, but they're all part of the same mix. And so maybe talk to us a little bit about that, and then Jim, into your close, please.
Let me turn my mic on. Well, from the beginning and from the start, in terms of this whole process, the objective was to engage globally, to be inclusive as possible, and as is reflected by those 438 think tanks from every region of the world, and all of the leading think tanks in the world, to work together, and in terms of the co-chairs, to share their presentations, to engage one another, and organically, as you have pointed out, both in terms of the questions that were posed and by the presentations that were done independently by the 5 co-chairs. There is significant, in certain areas, overlap. Certainly the digital dimension and how that, both in terms of the healthcare crisis, engaging vulnerable populations, and in terms of think tanks themselves, there is clear cross working group collaboration will need to take place, and I hope that that continues. That, as in all things, time and the demands of producing the report in some respects mitigate that or undermine the potential of doing that, but I encourage throughout for each of the chairs to share that information. And we have engaged virtually all of the participants in this process of engaging a global community that, from my perspective from the very beginning, is the only way to sort of tackle things, and that there is, as is evidenced by the last 2 town hall meetings, a global community of think tanks that is mobilized to respond. I have for years mentioned that the great unfulfilled promise of think tanks is truly interdisciplinary research. AI and others issue areas like health, like this crisis, demand interdisciplinary collaboration to address the issues. And as a professor of international relations, which is an interdisciplinary discipline, I always say to my students, we cannot understand a international problem from a single discipline perspective. And more importantly, we cannot solve the problem without an interdisciplinary approach. And so that's, my response to your question, Aaron. And in closing, I mean, I am a person who, at the start of this crisis, was stunned and saddened by it, but I am not one who wallows in self-pity for long, and firmly believe that that thinking and constructive action are the clear and most certain way of dealing with the crisis. One of the most influential interdisciplinary courses that I was in freshman year required us to read Rollo May's Man's Search for Meaning. And in that, it was clear that in the Holocaust and in terms of the crisis of being in a camp, finding meaning is incredibly difficult. But men and women must search for meaning. And I believe that meaning comes from constructive thinking and acting. I do, however, think that, and part of this effort is tremendously encouraging in terms of the response of the international community of think tanks, the ideas and mobilization that has taken place in a very short period of time, and the great promise of what will be produced and shared on June 30th. Overall, I think we need to, and the new reality is we must endeavor to be more agile, innovative, adaptive, and above all, we need to distill meaning from the chaos and develop programs and policies to respond to the crisis so that our communities and countries can be more resilient. The objective of the town hall is to help think tanks and countries adapt to a disruptive world and a operating environment. The working groups are intended to be a source of ideas, inspiration, trust, and optimism. They are designed to help think tanks effectively mobilize their staff so that they can provide meaning and direction in the time of chaos and sustained uncertainty. Finally, our role as think tanks must be to be smarter, better, faster, and more agile in a time of crisis, so that we can demonstrate the incredible and indispensable role we play in public policy and society. I am greatly encouraged by what I've heard today and what will be produced. And I encourage all of you, all 440 of you, to join one of the working groups and to share your ideas with them, concrete, action-oriented, evidence-based ideas that don't reflect a particular institutional or personal agenda, but really are for the common good. And that we can create, as a result of that, a host of public goods that will help us all deal with this incredible existential crisis that we are faced with. Thanks to all of you and to our partners and planning committee members and work group co-chairs for helping make this the second global virtual think tank town hall such a great success. Thank you and have a great day, evening, and middle of the night for some of you.